All right, on today's video brought to you by the 480 Experience, we are going to be talking about the Week 2 marquee matchups that I am looking forward to. It starts off immediately at 9 a.m. with a big noon Saturday, but of course, Kirk Herbstreit, Pat McAfee, Nick Saban, even Desmond Howard, all of these pictures and visuals now bring us to the game in which we are breaking down what is looking like the most important matchup. Going to be my personal opinion on some games I'm looking forward to, but we're going to definitely see what kind of conference is most dominant with this matchup being a Big Ten SEC school, or are we going to see some sort of dominance as we approach now some Big 12 games? I mean, they're considered out of conference games because of the basically the overrun of conference scheduling that they had to put in with the new Big 12 system. But ultimately, this Utah and Baylor game, it won't count towards a conference record, but it'll definitely count for some sortage on what we'll see in the Big 12. Ultimately, we start off 9 a.m. going straight into one of the most anticipated games on Saturday with Michigan and Texas. I think these two conferences take it personal on who is going to put out the most teams into the college football playoff this year. In terms of bragging rights, this is definitely going to have a say in the entire brand. Ultimately, last weekend, we got to see USC and LSU battle it out, and that was the first projection on whether the Big Ten or the SEC is more dominant. But we're going into Texas's first year in the SEC, and they're looking to at least establish some consistency in their new conference. I personally think they will have a hard, rude awakening in the new conference, just playing teams like a Georgia, going at Texas A&M. This is just uncharted waters for a Texas team, but I'm definitely excited to see how they do against a identity-less Michigan offense. So some things to acknowledge. Michigan definitely had a slow start last week, but they picked it up because of their defense with players such as Will Johnson and Mason Graham, ultimately NFL talent. I definitely can't wait to see how Quinn Ewers stays composed through this game. So ultimately, we'll see a lot of big noon action, and we'll see whether a Big Ten school in Michigan will establish that running game, will establish that dominance in the trenches, or we'll see if Texas can establish their air raid identity with Quinn Ewers balling out. Definitely looking forward to the other NBC featured game within the Big Ten, and that is going to be Nebraska versus Colorado. I think this game is a fight fire with fire type of game with Dylan Raiola and Shedeur Sanders almost projected to be NFL talented quarterbacks. Shedeur will definitely go top 10, but Dylan Raiola exceeded expectations last week. He definitely looked very competent, poised in the pocket, and I think this team, coached by Matt Rule, has really built around him in a significant way. I definitely liked the receiver in Jamal Banks. He is going to be the #1 target for Dylan Raiola, but ultimately their defense, they bring that Big Ten energy, and I think that is what's going to pressure Colorado because they really did struggle a little bit with North Dakota State on their defense. So I'll definitely love to see some Will Shepard, Travis Hunter action. I did like seeing some Hayden at the running back, but it's all about Shedeur right now, and is he going to be able to keep up with a Dylan Raiola, or is this going to be a low-scoring game? I think this is one of those games where you look forward to this air raid offense and you look forward to a high-scoring game, but it'll turn out going under the total points. Ultimately, after that is also a featured NBC Big Ten game in Oregon versus Boise State. Boise State is featuring Ashton Jeanty as a potential Heisman candidate at the running back position. He scored 6 touchdowns. It was an out-of-conference, less volume game, but Boise State definitely looks good. And over the course of their previous 3 matchups, Boise State actually beat Oregon. So Oregon coming into this game 0-3 versus Boise State in their last 3 matchups. We'll definitely get to see if Oregon is ready to establish some sort of presence because they were slow against Idaho last week, but they ultimately figured it out, and Dylan Gabriel definitely looks at least competent. But we go into the Duke's Mayos Classic in Tennessee versus North Carolina State. This, for some reason, is a rivalry game. It's interesting. I think there's a lot more tradition to it. They haven't really played against each other in a while, but I do like to see what Tennessee can do now, just coming off two really good offensive teams the last 2 years. Now I'm definitely seeing what Nico Amaleva can do at the quarterback position for them. Ultimately, North Carolina State struggled a little bit in their week 1 matchup last week, but they figured it out in the fourth quarter, pieced it all together. I still don't know how they are a ranked team, but this is their prime time moment to at least establish some sort of authority. Now we go into a good Big 12 matchup, but this does not count as a conference record game. But Utah and Baylor, they get to get their feet wet in as Utah's first, at least their arrival back into the Big 12, because they were originally a Big 12 school and now they're coming back after a departure from the Pac-12. Baylor looks dominant. Interesting to see what they'll be able to do against a strong Utah defense. Utah looks really good with Cameron Rising coming into his final year of college football eligibility, but I am going to expect a Utah dominant game just because they really want to make a name for themselves in the Big 12. But I definitely think this will be a closer game than people are predicting. There is a lot of projection towards a Utah blowout. So we'll definitely be excited to see that one. Now we go into another matchup that I'm excited for. There's basically two key matchups when it comes to the Big 12 because they are playing SEC opponents. The two teams are obviously our ASU playing Mississippi State and Oklahoma State playing Arkansas. I definitely can't wait to see what Arkansas can do against Oklahoma State, but Oklahoma State was a little slower in picking up their game. They played a really cool South Dakota State team, which was coming off these undefeated seasons as FCS opponent, and they did struggle a little bit in the beginning, but they pieced it together. They're coming in with a lot of traction with their star running back in Ollie Gordon balling out, but Alan Bowman, coming into his last year of college football eligibility, is looking to prove at least some sort of presence in a college football playoff contention. Ultimately, Oklahoma State wants to represent the Big 12, them, Kansas, and other potential contenders, maybe even a Utah. Arkansas could easily knock their team and their confidence down, and that'll project into how Oklahoma State plays the rest of their conference matchups as the season progresses. Another game that I'm really looking forward to is Washington State versus Texas Tech. This is going to be an opponent that we play in 2 weeks, speaking from ASU's perspective, but Texas Tech definitely looks to prove something. They have two transfer receivers who definitely are very talented, and Josh Kelly and Caleb Douglas, but ultimately their star player, Taj Brooks, is very, very good. I can't wait to see what Washington State does in terms of defending the Taj Brooks, but again, they are trying to at least make a name for themselves, being one of two teams in the Pac-2, originally the Pac-12, and I mean, we'll definitely see what has to happen. I mean, when you're looking at just being in this Pac-2, you still have a slot in the college football playoff. If you have a consistent season, you can do something because there's obviously a spot for a non-Power 4 school. So ultimately, whether it's Washington State or Oregon State or a Mountain West school just coming out of the trenches, we'll see what has to happen with that non-Power 4 school. Ultimately, I do have Texas Tech establishing a lot of dominance because they're trying to build some momentum going into the Big 12. Another game that I think is going to shock a lot of people just in terms of the college football nation is Kansas versus Illinois. This is a classic Big 12, Big 10 matchup that I think is going to keep a sour taste in Kansas's point of view because mainly Jalen Daniels did throw a very bad interception against Lindenwood. They did not look as dominant as they wanted to, but ultimately Devin Neal is really, really good at the running back position. I honestly have him or Ollie Gordon as one of the two interchangeable top running backs of the Big 12, but Illinois' defense is always legit. They struggle a little bit on offense per usual just because it's that classic Big Ten feel, a great defense and a lack of identity on offense, but ultimately you keep things low scoring and you produce. But I can't wait to see what Kansas can do just because they have so much to prove in the Big 12. They obviously want to have some implications in the college football playoff, but I think just playing a contending Big 10 school in Illinois, who's definitely a lot better than what they were last year, this could shock a lot of people. So ultimately, I could see Illinois knocking off of Kansas, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kansas completely blows out Illinois on Saturday. And then a good little rivalry game that I'm looking forward to is Iowa versus Iowa State. This is another classic Big 10, Big 12 matchup, but Iowa is looking to at least produce some sort of consistency on offense. Cade McNamara, previously at Michigan, he's looking like at least some competent quarterback play from Iowa. I mean, we'll see what they can do, but we always know their defense is legit. They definitely have NFL talent, a lot of upperclassmen on Iowa's defense. It's kind of ridiculous. A lot of graduates, a lot of redshirt seniors, and there's only 2 juniors on that entire defense. There's not a single underclassman on Iowa's defense, and that's pretty much why they are so good. But Iowa State, we'll see what they can do in terms of making their own name in the Big 10. I want to see, or in the Big 12, I want to see some sort of offensive consistency from Iowa State. I'm not going to expect it because they're playing such a difficult matchup on defense, but we'll see what Coach Campbell has in store because this is the Iowa Classic. We'll see which state is ultimately going to be represented by the college football team. I mean, it's like, look, it's like almost like what you see with ASU and Arizona. It's not only the territorial cup, but it's the bragging rights of which college football team is better in the prospective state. And then obviously the night game featured on ESPN, ASU going into a tough SEC matchup. Ultimately, Mississippi State looks to establish some sort of dominance in their conference, but I do see them being a bottom half team in the SEC. We'll see how well they produce, but I am expecting a lot of ASU running the ball. What I saw from Mississippi State last week was definitely some inconsistency against Eastern Kentucky, more or less because they were relying on the splash play too much. And why the score got out of hand was because ultimately Mississippi State had their players, their receivers, their skill players break the top off the defense of Eastern Kentucky. They just didn't have the athletes to keep up with Mississippi State talent. But ASU is exactly the matchup for Mississippi State to be humbled. I can't wait to see what ASU can do just in terms of projecting towards the Big 12. But if they do beat this Mississippi State team, they carry on and they beat a Thursday Texas State game, and then they go into Texas Tech and at least show some consistency, we could see a top 25 ranking with ASU coming down the leaderboard. But ultimately, this is going to be a great game. ASU has never beaten an SEC opponent in their program history. So I'm excited to see what we can do as a Sun Devil Nation. But ultimately, from Big Noon Saturday to the Big 10 games on NBC, literally at 4 o'clock, 7 o'clock, it's going to be a jam-packed Saturday. And I can't wait to see what Texas and Michigan game is going to be full of. Ultimately, this is bragging rights for which conference is better. But we'll definitely get to see what Quinn Ewers is full of, whether he can establish some sort of Heisman position. And I definitely can't wait to see if Will Johnson can get an interception on Quinn Ewers. But my favorite game is probably going to be that Nebraska-Colorado game just because of the media implications behind it. It's just 2 amazing quarterbacks battling it out. So it's kind of like that Thursday night game, Lamar Jackson versus Patrick Mahomes. It's like just 2 very MVP caliber quarterbacks just going against each other, and it's going to be a matter of which defense performs or who has the ball in their hands in the last 2 minutes. So thank you guys so much. This is Trevenchy's take on your Week 2 marquee matchups to look forward to, and I'm so excited to be immersed into the traffic and the heightening of college football this year. So thank you guys so much for another video with the 480 experience.